All right, we good? Mic
We're
check,
good.
mic check.
Checked.
All right, sounds good. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. My name is Chris Alaimo.
And I'm Ben Gassaway. Together, we are the Amateur Investors.
This podcast is our open source journal of everything we learn about investing and wealth management.
We're here to explore the key concepts, market dynamics, and investing strategies that will assist you on the path toward financial independence and financial literacy. Our mission is to build us up from amateurs to experts.
All suggestions are our own, and we recommend that you do your own research before taking any investment advice. See you in this week's episode. We hope you enjoy it. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Amateur Investors Podcast. Today, Ben and I are doing something a little different once again. We keep changing up the theme here, but in this
It's
episode,
always different.
It's always different. We're evaluating the theme of the American Rescue Plan Act, or basically the plan that Joe Biden signed into law. Signed into law that recently went into effect. As many more people know it as the $1.9 trillion COVID stimulus relief package. So we're just going to be hitting on some key topics here, the different things for funding of hospitals, how to get vaccines out quicker, helping with that, subsidies for COBRA coverage, funding resources for vaccines, treatment, PPE, contact tracing, and then also the non-healthcare related items such as, supporting childcare, small businesses, housing, and also schooling. So Ben, if you want to start breaking it down, let's get right into it.
Yeah, let's do it. And I feel like, Chris, I remember you had a little bit of a note in our sort of show outline here. The intent of this overview really is going to be sort of like a collective page turner together, just to break down and understand what went into law. How do you spend $1.9 trillion? This is not intended to be like a political discussion. We're not going to really share our opinions per se of the relief package. We might share maybe some reflections and just general opinion, maybe not necessarily opinions, but maybe just like responses to certain things, and maybe our own personal experiences with certain things like the stim check and stuff. So the intent not to be political. We just really want to do a little page turn with you folks, just to better understand what went into this $1.9 trillion stimulus package. So
Definitely.
I feel like the thing that has been in memes and in everyone's Instagram newsfeed, Facebook, everywhere, the direct financial payments, the stim checks or stimmies.
Everyone loves them.
Oh gosh, it's brutal. It's like it makes it feel very unofficial to call it a stimmy. I've been calling it a stimmy ironically, and now it's not ironic because I say it. So the $1,400 go to individuals making $75K or less, and there's essentially a phase out. You can think of it sort of as a like a stepwise spectrum, that as you kind of crank the dial up, as you're making a little bit more money, the switch totally turns off at 80K salary, and that's the adjusted gross income, or AGI. So essentially what your adjusted gross income is, it's your gross income minus your deductions. So, if you're claiming a dependent, if you have student loan interest expenses, all the things that you're listing in your tax return, that you're going to be deducting from your income. So it's really just gross income minus deductions. That gets you your AGI. So that $1,400 stim check might end up being, a $1,350 or $10 if you're like at $79,999 or something. Yeah, so yeah. That's the thing that's really been making headlines. Go ahead, Chris.
I guess the one thing I wanted to add is it's for married couples. Is it the two individuals? Is it 150K at your phase?
It is
to 160. Okay.
Yes.
That's what I thought.
150 to 160. Yes.
Okay.
So that's what I've come to find. I have recently been doing tax returns as like a side job, and I've come to find that like the IRS really is not that crafty with math. Like you it's like when you go to the grocery store and they're like, oh, 2 for 4 or 1 for 2. They're just doing math for you. Yeah. It's not like there's a benefit to being a couple or single. They just multiplied it by 2. That's what I've come to find. So if you see a number for like an individual, you can almost guarantee that for a married filing jointly or separately, it's just going to be that number times 2. There's nothing
a lot of times you see that with like Roth IRAs for family versus single and stuff like that. You see like the contribution limits and stuff.
Yep. Cool. The extended unemployment benefits. This was something that I think it is really beneficial and really worth noting, especially when you're going into filing your taxes. The extended unemployment benefits, sort of in a summary format, the $300 per week benefits were extended through September 6th of this year, 2021. And the total number of weeks available for unemployment were extended, or I guess increased, from 50 to 79 weeks, which is pretty dramatic. And what is unique to this package compared to the prior stimulus acts is that the first $10,200 of unemployment benefits in 2020 are totally tax-free if you make 150K or less, and then 20,400 for married filing jointly filers, or MFJ. So if you see that, that's what that stands for. That's a pretty big relief there, because if you, let's say you had $12,000 worth of, or 12,200, because I'm going to make it easier for myself for math. If you had $12,200 worth of unemployment benefits, that normally would have been taxed. So you lost your job and now you have to pay the money that the government gave you. That's pretty crummy if you didn't budget well around it. And it's pretty difficult to budget around it if you're not employed. So this is like an instant relief. The IRS is still working on, at least the last time I checked, the IRS is still working on providing formalized guidance about how to file that. So it may be prudent to hold off for a week or two if you have a substantial amount of unemployment benefits that were paid out to you in 2020. That being said, if you don't necessarily need your return ASAP, you could file now, and you could always file an amended return down the road. It's just more paperwork, but there's options. And if you are due that money, you will receive it, and that money will be tax free, and that's a pretty big deal. Anything you want to talk about on that one, Chris, or I'll just keep kind of chugging along here.
Chugging along here.
This is a beefy plan. I really just tried to hit all the highlights of what assigned numbers and seemed like moderately relatable, because it's a beefy, as with most legislation, it's a beefy document. So we'll make sure to share the links to basically everything I was looking at and just like the official government documents. So moratoriums, they were upheld, and the financial assistance was increased through the American Rescue Plan Act. I'll just kind of walk through some of the quick numbers. About almost $22 billion for emergency rental assistance. September 2027. September 30th seems to be like a recurring date, just with different years. $5 billion in emergency housing vouchers, $750 million to tribal housing, $100 million to rural housing, and $5 billion to assist people experiencing homelessness. So I guess all in all, what are we looking at here? 2030. $33 billion towards moratorium and sort of like housing assistance. Let's see here. I think really the targeted goals of this act, just reading through it, is just like the really basic necessities that would intuitively be impacted by the pandemic. Loss of food, loss of income, loss of housing, loss of shelter. That covers a lot of it, and just trying to find crafty ways to like leverage tax benefits and tax relief. So another thing, in terms of just like the, general necessity aids, there was an increased food aid to the SNAP benefits. It was about almost $2 billion for nutrition assistance. And they increased. So this is something I don't fully know, and I'm like lucky to be able to say that. I'm not fully sure or familiar with sort of like the vouchers, but essentially they increase the value for those vouchers for food, just trying to get Americans fed through this act. Another benefit that if you have kids, the child tax credit was expanded, and the maximums were increased for a specific range of children and their ages. So the child tax credit, the maximum was raised to $3K for children 6 to 17. And for every child under the age of 6, for couples that make 150K or less, there's that 150K number. Chris, this is one that's not just doing the math. So there was actually some formulaic thought here. So $3,600 for each child under the age of 6 for couples who make 150K or less, and single parents who make 112,500 or less. so that's a credit will be going for every child. And the payments will be sent by direct deposit on a monthly basis. So you just take the credit and divide it by 12, and that's going to be the direct deposit. What's unique about this credit, it is refundable, meaning that whoever does qualify, you get the credit no matter your tax situation. So if you owe money, whatever, you get it, you get the money no matter what, which I think is quite a benefit in probably one of the toughest years in our country in a long time. This is one that I think is hopefully foreshadowing, Chris.
Yeah.
Hopefully foreshadowing for something good to come. So student loan forgiveness. Student loan forgiveness was not built into the $1.9 trillion of like federal relief or the American Rescue Plan, but there are provisions and verbiage in the plan itself. Everything's ringing, Chris. We got the fire department behind me. Your phone's ringing.
Yeah.
So there's currently not student loan forgiveness built into the plan, but there are provisions and the language states that any loan forgiveness that is issued and like essentially enacted into law between December 30th, 2020 and January 1st, 2026 will be totally tax-free. And although there's not been student loan forgiveness baked into the plan, the fact that that was baked into law is a major step for any future stimulus, which I've been reading some headlines, hearing some podcasts that there's definitely talk of a potential fourth stimulus package to come, and potentially preceding stimulus where, monthly direct payments. I don't know what it's going to look like. I'm sure it's going to be much less than what they hype it up to be initially. But at the very least, they crossed the finish line, or at least took a step towards the finish line for student loan forgiveness to be possible, because typically student loan forgiveness is taxed as taxable income. But because of this law, any forgiveness just goes directly to the principal of the balance, depending on what you owe, which is huge.
So I know this is actually something I was talking to one of my good friends. His girlfriend, she works as, she is, I'm going to mess this up. She is a physical therapist. Okay. And she works for a nonprofit, technically. I think that's how they're classified. And in the event, she has it built in for this specific thing. After 10 years, she gets total forgiveness of her loans. But exactly like Ben was saying, so let's just say for simple numbers, let's just say she's making $80,000. And then in the event after 10 years, whatever her salary changes to, she's making $80,000 10 years from now still. And then all of a sudden she had $200,000 in loan. We're just throwing out simple numbers here to make it easy. So all of a sudden, instead of going from making $80,000, they would include that tax or the student loan forgiveness, as she made $280,000 in income that year, which even though she made 80 grand and then made $200,000 off on her loans, that would mean that she would get bumped up into a much, much, much higher tax bracket. And I was actually doing the numbers. I think she would owe, in theory, $68,000 in taxes, or even, no, it was even more than that. I think it was 130. I don't want to, she would owe basically her whole base salary because of this step of doing that. So that's not even including food. That's not including rent. That's not including anything of her cost of living. But basically it was screwing people that would take advantage of this. So, it's something that sounds great on paper, but then all of a sudden you go to take advantage of it, and then it puts you into this higher tax bracket that you either need to convert basically your whole salary into traditional 401k, or you need to probably do some really crafty things using your CFP and kind of live off your savings for a little bit. But yeah, I know that was something that potentially could happen to you if you had a really, really high or expensive, outstanding balance on student loans, basically.
Yeah, Chris, that's incredibly burdensome. And I never thought about the tax implications of a student loan forgiveness. It always just feels like they're writing you checks, and, what I've come to find is the government loves to just have strings attached to everything. It's like a bad date. So
I'll add one little other story too. There was one, my best friend sent me this. It was a California couple, and they got in a similar program where it was 10 years. After working 10 years, they were both school teachers. You got exempt completely from your student loans, or so they thought. So they both took jobs in this district. that they thought qualified. The bank was saying, yeah, you're good. The government, all these different things. And then all of a sudden after 10 years, so they were like 32 or 30, they were 22, 23 when they started their jobs. So then 10 years later, they're 33. They have 2 kids now. They're living below their means. They're doing really well. They're like, okay, like it's been 10 years, to the day of when we started paying our loans, like is the rest forgiven? And they're like, oh, no. There's 5 criteria that you didn't meet. You're not in a low income neighborhood teaching. You weren't all these different factors. So all of a sudden they thought a huge perk they were getting. There was all this fine print that no one knew until they actually went to enact. So just
classic.
I will speak. I am not a tax advisor. I know Ben's not a tax advisor, even though he helps with it. With anything with loans or anything, make sure you read the fine print. Get a lawyer to read the fine print. Get a government official to read you the fine print. Read it yourself. Just say do your own research, because you do not want to get lumped into some really bad situation like that.
Yeah, I think that's a good rule of thumb for anything where you're sort of counting on, or at least banking on, I guess, sort of a pun there, banking on like a large sum of money at the end of a term of some agreement, whether it's, a mortgage, student loan forgiveness, pension benefits, like you make sure you walk through that scenario at the terminal point. Otherwise, things like that will sneak up on you, because if you just assume that it's going to work out, the other side of that coin is also assuming that you're going to assume that. So the folks writing the contract, they get paid to get more money at the end of the contract if you didn't read your fine print. So that's a really broad brush piece of advice, but like really don't just assume that it's going to work out. Like ask questions, ask the things that people think are stupid questions. Just walk through every bit of that scenario, because it's your money, and that's the key to being a good investor, is we don't lose money.
Yeah.
I don't care how much money I make. The first thing I'm going to do is not lose money. So
or
that's
avoid, or do everything I can to avoid losing money, for sure. Yeah.
Correct. So Chris, before I move on to, the last couple of, topic headlines of the American Rescue Plan, if the person you were talking about that had the $200,000 in student loan, if she's single, she would be paying $98K in taxes. If she was married, filing jointly, that's $67,000.
Okay, I think the 67 was what I was doing. My friend and his girlfriend aren't married, but in the event that were to occur, that's a lot of freaking money in taxes.
Oh, if they're not married, then she's single. If you're not married, you're single.
Exactly. Yep.
Which is silly.
But I'm saying, this is
it's $100,000.
She's only 2 years into it. If they're married, in the future or whatever,
right?
8 years when it becomes available to basically.
Either way, you're 70 to 100K.
Yeah,
like
it's absurd. It was absurd.
I don't even know how you'd budget around that. Could you just take another loan to pay off the loan that was forgiven?
You probably just have to live like way below your means, and you're converting probably more than half your salary into traditional 401k to avoid, to lower your taxable income. That's the only way that I could think to do it, basically.
Or you take out another loan, honestly.
Oh yeah, you probably
right?
consolidate to take out another loan.
You take out, or they'd forgive your loan, but if you need to pay the income, you could probably take out a personal loan to pay off the taxes. That's just,
although it would be a pretty, not that student loans are a low interest rate, but it'd probably be a high interest rate on the personal loan that you're taking out anyway. You're probably assuming 7 to 9%. Yeah, it's not a good situation.
No, I want to look into that too, and understand kind of how that tax, is there time in between? That's really,
yeah.
No, go ahead, Chris.
So I'm just saying, it looks like under Biden's administration, they're kind of trying to make ways to, I know that they kind of threw out $10,000 potentially loan forgiveness across the country. They potentially also put out, and I know there's kind of rebuttal between politicians, Democrats, Republicans. Joe Biden said he's not in favor of doing that. They're kind of putting the roadmap to do potential student relief packages, by making tax exempt from 2020 to 2026. Anyone that's taking advantage of those 10-year reliefs are really getting a huge benefit. I can't speak for anything past 2026. I really can't speak after 2024 of a new president coming in theory.
Yeah.
What could happen, basically.
Yeah, I guess just the long and short is that if student loan forgiveness is passed during the Biden administration, it's going to be tax-free. So that whole situation that Chris and I discussed, where, if you have $200,000 on your balance sheet as a liability in student loans, that just disappears, which I think that's awesome. It's just something you don't have to worry about. You shouldn't have to worry about it. If the government is giving you relief, it should just be relief with no strings attached. the idyllic.
You wish that was the case all the time, but as you can see, that is not.
I'm sure there's strings attached to the strings, but we'll have another episode to find out if that comes out, because that will be huge for my life. Okay, last 4 things, headline wise, in terms of this act. We're again just doing a page turner. I want to make sure that we walk through what's a part of this relief package. Honestly, just prepping for this episode, this is the first time that I did really sort of a line by line understanding what happened. Like $1.9 trillion is like, it is fake money essentially, because the government is printing. Watch our Bitcoin episodes. But it is so important to understand, like, where is the government's money going? Even if, whether you agree with it or not, it's happened. But I think it's always good to educate yourself and just be aware of like big things like this that can really shift the financial future of our country. And that's kind of what they're hoping this is. It's an investment for America's future. So hopefully it works out. Okay. Schools and childcare block grants. So essentially what the provisions were, and there's nuances in it. There's $130 billion for K through 12 education. And the primary initiatives for this grant program was targeted to reduce, I guess the real synopsis of what the goal is for this is to safely reopen schools. Yep. And the means with which they could do that, they being the government, they aim to reduce class sizes, making that financially feasible, just because schools, have limited space. So that already is an obstacle to making that possible. Improve ventilation. So, better HHV system, something similar to like what the airlines instituted in their aircraft, which is obviously very difficult to do in a building versus like a pressurized container, which is like the cabin of a plane. Yeah. But still things that they're pushing towards. Also PPE purchases, I feel like that is still so relevant. PPE is obviously still, it's not as inaccessible as it was at the start of the pandemic, when it felt like blue masks were going to be the new money in addition to toilet paper. But nonetheless, like PPE is still an expendable, because if they recommend the double masks, doing the disposables, it's obviously the safest method. So supporting those purchases is huge. And then the goal, reopen schools safely. Yep. Okay. Third, or I guess third to last, the $25 billion was sent in pandemic assistant grants to restaurants and bars. And the limited, so if you own a restaurant or a bar, there are limits in place for how that assistance can be allocated. At most, it'll be $10 million per company, or $10 million per like restaurant franchise, chain, what have you. And then a limit of $5 million per physical location. And that is intended to cover payroll, rent, utilities, and other expenses. Okay, pandemic response. This is like the bread and butter. This is obviously why these stimulus packages even exist. $50 billion to pay for additional COVID testing, contact tracing, basically just developing the infrastructure to snuff out the virus, which looking at the numbers, it seems like we're on a positive being good trajectory. So the vaccines are helping. Obviously it's getting warmer, so hopefully open outdoor dining and what have you will help. $19 billion was to increase the size of public health workforce. I didn't read too deeply into that section, so I'm not sure exactly how that is being distributed. I'm assuming it's going to various hospitals and it's being prorated by the size of the hospital. I don't want to assume, but that's what I'm guessing. Yeah. So I'll need to look into that to understand a little bit more if anyone's curious about that specifically. $16 billion for the vaccine distribution and supply chain funding. Chris, did we hit the 100 million doses already? Did we get that goal? I know Biden said it on his Instagram. I think we did yesterday.
I think so.
Okay, because they did it 30 days early, which is pretty cool that they hit a number. That's a pretty big number.
In 58 days. Yeah, it was 2 days.
That's awesome.
Ago.
They were going to do 100 million in 100 days. So that's a really good track. I mean, that's way more than I expected.
And that's honestly just doses. So that's me, even though that could be a first dose of a second. So obviously, that even though they're vaccinated, that wouldn't count as full vaccination if it's Pfizer or Moderna are the two ones that are.
Yeah, Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca as well. If you're in like the UK.
And I know
J&J.
J&J is single dose, which is interesting.
Yes. I don't want to just spit out numbers because these are on things that people have told me. So fact check me. But from what I heard from people is that like the first dose of Moderna and Pfizer is like on par, if not higher, in terms of efficacy against the J&J, just the first dose. Is that true?
I haven't looked in enough to know.
I'll look at it
I
and
don't
fact
know
check myself later.
Personally.
But at the very least, like you were getting some level of immunity. So like, even if it's not a lot, I feel like that's definitely progress in the right direction. And like that first dose is a guaranteed second dose based on what I've been hearing and reading is that like, if you get your first dose, you basically get scheduled for your second. So people are getting vaccinated, which is awesome.
The one benefit to the J&J, and this is like what I've heard, it doesn't have to be kept at those like cryogenic temperatures.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the benefit. It can transport more easily. It's cost less for storage and stuff. So
yeah, it's just more.
I think you're right.
Accessible.
I think the efficacy is definitely lower than the other two.
The Johnson & Johnson one?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I think it's just as effective in like lowering the mortality. Is that the way to say that? It prevents like serious illness. Like it's not as effective in preventing infection, but it is, I think, on par with preventing like terminal infection. Like, you know, like I think it's just as effective, but I'll do a breakdown because I want to understand the vaccines a little bit more. Okay. Lastly, state and government, local government aid. I didn't do a ton of research on this part. I just wanted to understand like what was sort of the receipt. So $350 billion in aid was sent to states, cities, tribal governments, and U.S. territories. And the overall objective of that initiative was to replace the lost tax revenue during the pandemic. And there was like an analysis that said that over 26, I think it was exactly 26 states experienced like drastic lost tax revenues, which makes sense. I feel like I have to do the breakdown of the states themselves, but I would imagine that states with large like urban centers, you know, where folks are fleeing from the city to the suburbs would probably experience a lot of those lost tax revenues. So that is my very long-winded stream of consciousness walkthrough of the American Rescue Plan. I hope that part was helpful for folks. And if anyone has questions as they're listening to this or watching us talk, Chris is going to walk through a little bit more of what's to come in terms of like the tax deadline. But if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out. Like, again, we're not experts on government legislation, but I felt that, you know, this is something that directly impacts our money. So that's our cash flow as investors. So hope this helps.
Yeah. I guess before I get into the IRS changing the tax day this year, a few things that I want to note real quick. So I know the 10-year treasury yield is kind of something that's everyone's been keeping their watchful eye on. It has still continued to go up, which basically means, long story short, I know we talked about it in the last episode when you're talking about, you know, what's your risk adjusted return, and we did 1.64. Right now, today it's sitting at 1.69. It closed the day or yesterday a little bit higher at 1.73. Basically, what this means is people are looking at what their risk-free rate is if you were to just throw it in a 10-year treasury note versus to investing it in a business. The interest rates kind of affect the economy more than probably anything else in terms of its correlation. We've also seen mortgage rates bump up once again. I think they've changed 9 times this year already, which is like a 5-year high that it's steadily been increasing. So whenever Jerome Powell goes on, you know, God love him, because he has one of the most difficult jobs during the middle of a pandemic with the money printer on his one hand saying inflation isn't here, but then everything in the market and investors are saying, no, you're wrong. We just pumped all this money into the market. So I definitely don't know how he sleeps at night, but that's not for me to worry about. We've also seen the barrel of oil go from March of last year to all-time lows to now we're sitting at a 5-year high for the barrel of oil. And we're starting to see price creep in a lot of things as things start to open back up. So just with that being said, I know Ben and I have always preached about Bitcoin, but this is a good time, if now more so than ever, to get into it as a protection against an inflation of assets. So basically, as these interest rates creep up, we're going to see potentially stocks and real estate come down in value because it's the cost of capital or the cost to borrow money is going to get more expensive. The mortgage rates have been going up because there's not enough demand on the market. So in order to stop like people just throwing money at houses, they need to bring interest rates up to bring the cost of homes down, like the seesaw that we keep mentioning.
Well, they haven't raised rates though yet. I thought Powell was pretty fixed on not raising
he has
rates
not
for a
raised rates,
while.
but the banks have started to raise rates on interest rates themselves, and Treasury have started to raise rates. The banks are raising rates to disincentivize people from buying because they start seeing it as a risk. As if houses are getting appraised, like let's say this house 100,000, and all of a sudden people are bidding warring it up all the way up to 150, 200, 250,000. That's a risk for the bank, because in the event that Jerome Powell does raise interest rates in 2022, 2023, maybe earlier, because we're starting to see crazy inflation, they don't know what he's going to do, but they're hedging the risk on their end of saying we're making money more difficult to borrow to protect themselves from people just like, I'm going to give you $1 million on a home that only appraises for 100,000. When the rates go back up, that million can crash down very quickly. So that's just them protecting themselves, basically.
Yeah, those rates though are separate for like the lending rates are separate from the 10-year.
Yep.
Because the 10-year note is like an open market. So like why that rate is going up is because there's just a massive sell-off in the bond market.
Not even that, people aren't buying. So if people aren't buying, they have to keep raising.
And they're selling.
And they're selling. So it's an inverse correlation, or both of these things happen, it goes up. Yep. So then they need to keep raising the rate in order to incentivize people to buy the bonds to bring the rates back down. That's just kind of macroeconomic themes overall for this package. I really worry about things opening back up that we're going to see. I mean, we're already seeing record gas prices. It's only going to get
That's
worse.
What I was going
to say. So I just think a lot of things, vacations are going to get more expensive when cruise lines come back up. If you haven't gone on flights, which many people, I have not been on in over a year, because flights are going to get a lot more expensive, because not only are these businesses hurting for revenue, but there's just all this free cash flow in the market right now that's going to bump up and probably hold up these rates for the foreseeable future, for at least the next few years, it seems.
Yeah, I'm pretty nervous about it, and I'll let you talk through the next section. But that's a really good point, Chris. Of just like where are we macro wise? And like honestly, I haven't had my ear to the markets as closely as I normally do. But just taking a look at the yield increase recently on the 10-year, like that's alarming. Especially just seeing that rapid change, seeing the price action in oil. Seeing the price action in equities, where just the volatility is just like, I just feel like we're on the precipice of just an unraveling to a degree. And that's like a really pessimistic look. And I haven't assigned numbers to it, but I sort of have, looking at the Shiller PE ratio. Like we're not at .com boom levels, but that doesn't mean like you hit that ceiling and then the ceiling shatters. Like the market has crashed at lower PEs. Like the Warren Buffett indicator is almost at 200%.
Yeah, it was at like 190,
190,
88,
yeah.
Which normally 100's fair market value. So 180 is like, double what it should be, basically, is what Warren's saying.
Yeah, it's just in the midst of a pandemic. Like I can understand if we're in the roaring, we know what happens in the roaring 20s, but like if economically we're just prospering as a country, we're not. I mean, we're still in deep unemployment.
9.3 million unemployed, I think, or something like that.
I think the weekly numbers were better. Like I feel like a couple of weeks ago, subscribe to our newsletter. We're going to a bi-weekly schedule, but I think the past couple of weeks it's been oscillating between 700K per week, 700K. I mean, that's pretty substantial numbers. Unemployment's not great. New jobs are not being added. I think manufacturing data wasn't too bad, but retail data was bad. Like saving rates are super high. So I think the key takeaway from what Chris and I are saying, at least from my perspective, if you have some cash on the side, I think, we're definitely strong believers in Bitcoin and investing and preserving wealth in a scarce asset. But if you have some immediate cash needs, like bills, liabilities, what have you, like absolutely make sure that emergency fund exists in your life. Like now is the most perfect time than ever to have, 3 to 6 months of emergency cash on hand. We don't know what's going to happen. That's my short answer to a long uncertainty is I don't know what's going to happen. So just be prepared for the worst case scenario all the time, and then you'll be okay.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so getting off the doom and gloom topics of the macroeconomics.
We love that here.
We're going to go into the tax part of it. So the Treasury Department and Internal Revenue Service, or the IRS, announced not today, a few days ago, that the tax filing is going to be changed for 2020. Instead of the traditional April 15th of 2020, it's going to be now May 17th of 2021. The IRS is providing formal guidelines for dates and deadlines and all that. Basically, that's when tax returns or filing for taxes is due. I know it's varies state by state. I know Ben and I reside in New Jersey. I know you're kind of, I guess, in New York now. Do you know what New York's is? Did they bump it back?
I'm in New Jersey still.
Yeah, New Jersey. My bad. Yeah, you're in New Jersey. But I know for New Jersey, they've mirrored what the IRS has done, but that's not the same for all states. A state could say you still owe on May 15th. But then for federal, you owe on May 17th. So that's very important. Make sure you look up. We'll include the link to all the state agencies below. But make sure, some people are definitely going to get tripped up on like, oh, I don't know taxes till May 17th. That is not the case. We are not tax professionals. We're just two guys on YouTube and a podcast. So listen to your tax professionals. But this is what the IRS has given out as guidelines so far. And then there's also one last little piece is their winter storm disaster relief. So for Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Texas. So FEMA announced that victims of the February winter storm that crashed through Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana, they have until June 15, 2021 to file various individual and business tax returns to make tax payments. So basically just helping them with, when they got burdened with the snowstorm and everything.
Perfect. Yeah. And when that was announced, that was prior to the extension to May 17th federally. So when the May 17th was issued, that June date, the June 15th, that wasn't impacted by the federal. So that June 15th is what it is. Just so if you're tracking some of the news, if you're like a Texas, Oklahoma, or Louisiana resident. So we walk through, a lot of information on this, and this will all be provided in the show notes. I think the way that we walk through it, it's going to really nicely present as reading material, and we'll be sure to include, links and references for, state specific type things. So if anyone has, personal or, state or local specific questions, feel free to reach out to us. And if there's resources that we can provide on our website, like obviously we keep any personal information confidential. We would never highlight someone's info, but if we can provide you some information, like feel free to reach out. And if we know anyone who would be, a true authority on the subject, we'll definitely get you connected to them as well. Lastly, who should file their taxes immediately and who should hold off? We've talked about that there is whispers of a fourth stimulus package, which at this point feels crazy. I don't know if it's going to happen, but the amount of money that the government has injected into the economy is pretty staggering. Chris, do you remember the figure of how much money was printed in 2020, roughly?
At least 40% of all dollars that were ever made were printed into the economy.
In 2020, right?
Yeah.
Crazy. I mean, that's just, I just can't even wrap my head around it, but that
really
figure is real. That figure is real. And QE, quantitative easing, the money printing, the buying back of bonds, that is going on as we speak. How this ends, I don't know. But so going back to who should file their taxes immediately and who should hold off, I'm going to sort of start with the end in mind. Again, Chris mentioned it. This is framed as tax advice, but this is not intended to be tax advice. Like, please, like consult a financial or tax professional to like decide what is the best course of action for you in your current financial situation. I don't think it ever hurts to file immediately, honestly. You're sort of playing with fire to be kind of tactical with your taxes, to try and get some of the stim package. But if you have all your information, you're ready to file, and we're not too close to the May federal deadline, and you're on track to file in time for your state return. If your income was higher in 2020 versus 2019, and you exceed that 80K threshold, this really applies for like that third stimulus check. Like, I think that's already kind of passed. So I honestly, I would just file immediately. But if in the coming weeks before this episode airs, while this episode airs, I guess, that there is sort of like more guidance around how the fourth stimulus check would be built around your income. If you made more in 2020 versus 2019, you'd be phased out. Maybe delay if possible, because if you need that money now, it might be best just to get the stim check and then file immediately. But we're already through the third round of stimulus checks. I honestly, I would just prefer just to file as soon as possible, get it off your plate, and be done with it. For folks who should file immediately, this is like my advice, kind of my analysis. If your income was impacted by COVID-19 through unemployment, furlough, et cetera, what have you, I would definitely consider filing as soon as possible. That $10.2 thousand dollars worth of tax forgiveness on unemployment benefits will go a long way. I think the guidance is either in place or will be in place in short order. Contact your tax professional, whoever's doing your taxes. Look in the IRS website, see what the guidance is if you're doing your own TurboTax, what have you. But there are a lot of benefits that have come into this relief package as we've walked through, and it might be prudent, especially if you have children. Like I said, if your income was impacted, it would probably be in your best interest to file as soon as possible to get your tax return and all of those credits that are due to you. And with the lower wages, and it's tax bracket dependent, you could be eligible for a larger stimulus check. So if you didn't receive the past two stimulus checks, but you know with certainty, like Chris, I think you experienced this. If you know with certainty that you are due the stimulus check, what the stimulus checks are, they're not just free money. They are, depending on how you were filed, but the stimulus checks were meant to be an advance on your 2020 tax return. So if you were intended to be paid that money, when you file for 2020 tax return for 2019, is that the way to say it? When you're filing your 2020 tax returns, if you were supposed to receive the first two stimulus payments and did not, that will be baked into your return. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I kind of like did jump rope over my words, but essentially, like if you were intended to be paid that money, you won't be forgotten. That will be a part of your pending return for 2020. Yep. So again, contact a tax professional, understand what is best for your situation. But really the goal of this episode was just to walk through a pretty big financial act that was passed in the US. Chris, any other comments here as we wrap up?
No, I think we hit all the points we wanted to hit. Nice 50-minute episode, I think, right around
longer than
mark.
I thought. We thought it was going to be 20, 30 minutes. We were going to try and get
this out in 25, 30 minutes. That is not the case.
We're not good at it.
No, we're not good at managing our time. We're better at managing our money, I will say. So,
I hope so.
Thanks for listening with us, guys, or watching on YouTube. I don't do this enough, so smash the subscribe or like button. If you dislike it, that's good too, but we prefer the like button. Also, comments. If you're not a robot, I promise I will respond. If there's anyone that gives their WhatsApp in the comments, or they say Joe Schmo 62 is a great tax professional or robo-advisor, just report those comments for us, because I go through and report all those. And normally you'll see a slew of 10 comments of basically the same thing by just different accounts within seconds of each other. So yeah, but if you are real, not a robo person, we would love to talk to you. Shoot us a comment, like, subscribe, hit us on any of our social media channels, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, you name it.
LinkedIn.
Even
if you are a real robo person, you can reach out. But if you're
a real robo person, you can reach out to us.
I'll allow that one.
You can always check out our website too. There's a lot of good information on there, a lot of show notes. I know we're always trying to catch up on that. We are trying to get some merch to come out soon.
That's big.
Merch, and not just merch. We're trying to get like accessories and stuff. So that's something that's big. That'll be coming in the coming weeks. Sooner the better, but that's on our end. We'll try and get that for you. Aside from that, thanks guys for listening. Have a good one.
See you next week.